Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today we'll explore a tragic case that occurred in the Kai Tak residential area of Tsuen Wan, Hong Kong. Around 11 p.m. on July 8, 2001, the Tsuen Wan police station received an emergency call. The caller was a woman named Ma Chu-feng. She reported finding bloodstains on her apartment's floor and ceiling, and her parents' bedroom door was locked. Despite her repeated calls, there was no response from inside. Fearing something had happened to her parents, she contacted the police. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly arrived at the apartment in Building C of Kai Tak residential area. The moment they stepped inside, they were hit by the overwhelming smell of blood. The scene showed signs of attempted cleanup, but blood stains and drag marks were still clearly visible on the floor. When police approached the locked bedroom door and forced it open, despite Chu-feng's mental preparation, nothing could have readied her for the horrifying scene that awaited. On her parents' bed lay two bodies covered by a blanket. When the blanket was removed, they discovered two naked bodies with their heads wrapped in clothing. Even through the wrapping, the blood seeping through revealed the gruesome nature of their injuries. The victims were later identified as Chu-feng's parents. The forensic examination revealed that both victims died from multiple blunt force traumas to the head. The male victim had been struck at least 10 times, while the female victim had been struck over 30 times. Shortly after, police found an iron hammer in a dumpster below the apartment, which was confirmed to be the murder weapon. The female victim also showed defensive wounds, indicating she had desperately fought back during the attack. The medical examiner determined that the victims had been dead for over 24 hours, likely between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. the evening before the discovery. Who were these victims, and why were they killed in such a brutal manner? The victims were Mr. Ma Zhiqiang, 68, and Mrs. Kai Liying, 63, both retirees. They originated from Puning City in Guangdong Province. Years earlier, Zhiqiang had illegally immigrated to Hong Kong and eventually obtained his Hong Kong ID card. At that time, his wife Liying remained in mainland China, with Zhiqiang making regular trips back to visit her. The couple had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. In 1981, once Zhiqiang had established a stable life in Hong Kong, he brought his wife and 3 older children to live with him. Their youngest son, Ma Xiaochao, was only 1 year old at the time and was left in his grandmother's care. It wasn't until 1990, when Xiaochao was 10, that he finally joined his family in Hong Kong. Initial police investigation revealed that the family lived a modest life with no apparent conflicts with outsiders. Their daughter Chu-feng confirmed that her parents led a disciplined lifestyle and had no financial disputes with anyone. At first, police suspected a home invasion robbery gone wrong. However, after a thorough examination of the crime scene, this theory was quickly dismissed. First, the arc-shaped blood patterns on the walls and ceiling indicated that the perpetrator had struck with extreme force each time. Furthermore, the killer had cut off the victim's clothes, leaving them naked. If robbery was the motive, why go to such cruel lengths? The most logical explanation was that the killer harbored intense hatred toward the victims, suggesting a deep-seated grudge. Secondly, robbers typically use knives as weapons, but the murder weapon in this case was an iron hammer, clearly not a typical burglar's tool. Finally, police found no signs of forced entry on any doors or windows, and nothing had been stolen from the apartment. This led investigators to believe the perpetrator was someone familiar with the victims. At the time of the murders, the eldest son and daughter had already moved out with their own families. The household typically consisted of the victims, their second daughter Chu-feng, and their youngest son Xiaochao. However, although Chu-feng was unmarried, she often stayed at her boyfriend's place. Initially, police only suspected someone familiar with the family, not necessarily a family member. However, suspicion grew when the youngest son Xiaochao disappeared after the murders and became unreachable. Adding to their suspicions, Chu-feng told police about her brother's strange behavior in the 2 days leading up to the discovery. She recalled receiving a phone call from Xiaochao on the evening of July 7th, 1 day before the bodies were found. He asked if she would be coming home that night. When she told him she was planning to stay out for mahjong, he hung up immediately. The second call came just hours before the bodies were discovered, with Xiao Chao again asking when she'd return home. When she said she'd be home soon, he quickly ended the call. Combining these suspicious phone calls with Xiao Chao's disappearance, police suspected he might be connected to the double homicide. If he wasn't the killer, he at least knew what had happened. This led to an immediate manhunt for the youngest son. With a warrant out for his arrest, Xiao Chao couldn't leave Hong Kong through any checkpoints. Immigration records confirmed he was still in the territory. Police mobilized a large force to search the Tsuen Wan area and the Kai Tak residential complex. When officers visited Xiao Chao's workplace, they learned he had been fired over a month ago following a fight with a co-worker. Attempts to locate his friends proved futile. It seemed he had none. After several days of searching, police had no leads. During their investigation, police discovered that Xiao Chao had only one hobby: watching movies. They began showing his photo at every movie theater in the Tsuen Wan area. At the Broadway Cinema in Tsuen Wan Plaza, the manager confirmed that Xiao Chao was a regular customer. After getting this lead, police left their contact information with the manager, instructing him to call immediately if Xiao Chao appeared. Sure enough, 22 days later, on July 29th, Xiao Chao showed up at the cinema. Police rushed to the scene after receiving the call, but by the time they arrived, he had already left the theater. However, investigators suspected he couldn't have gone far. Their instincts proved correct. Moments later, they found Xiao Chao on the third floor. When confronted by police, his first words were a haunting confession. "I didn't want to do it, but he hit me first." Contrary to police expectations, the arrest was remarkably smooth. Xiao Chao offered no resistance and, at the police station, provided a detailed confession of the entire incident. But what could drive a young man to commit such a heinous act against his own parents? What happened on that fateful night? To understand this tragic case, we need to examine Xiao Chao's life and the trauma he endured. At the time, Xiao Chao was 21 years old. As mentioned earlier, he grew up in mainland China and only moved to Hong Kong at age 10. What should have been a joyous family reunion turned into the beginning of a nightmare, as reality proved vastly different from his expectations. Years of separation had created an unbridgeable gap between Xiao Chao and his family. He had so little contact with them that he barely remembered what his father looked like. His siblings, having grown up separately, were like strangers to him. The four siblings had developed in completely different environments, making it difficult for Xiao Chao to integrate into the family unit. However, family integration wasn't his biggest challenge. Adapting to Hong Kong society proved even more daunting. At that time, the education system, culture, and language in Hong Kong were entirely different from mainland China. Xiao Chao only spoke Teochew dialect and couldn't communicate in Cantonese, creating an immediate language barrier. In his hometown, he had friends, but in Hong Kong, he lost all social connections. Unable to speak the local language, he found himself alienated not only from his family, but from the entire city. Due to differences between the education systems, Xiao Chao had to start over from first grade in Hong Kong. Imagine the humiliation of a 10-year-old sitting in a classroom with 6-year-olds. His classmates were all several years younger, making him an outsider in every grade. They viewed him with strange, often contemptuous looks, making it nearly impossible for him to make friends. Academically, he struggled to keep up with classes taught in Cantonese and English. His grades remained poor, and his father, rather than showing understanding, constantly berated him, causing their relationship to deteriorate further. As for his siblings, the lack of shared childhood experiences meant there was little emotional connection. While his siblings were close with each other, they couldn't relate to Xiao Chao. Gradually, he became increasingly isolated and withdrawn. Even when his siblings tried to reach out, Xiao Chao remained silent. This communication barrier prevented any meaningful sibling relationships from developing. At 18, Xiao Chao dropped out after completing junior high school. This decision enraged his father, who believed that abandoning education meant throwing away his future. But no amount of lecturing could change Xiao Chao's mind. He had completely lost faith in the education system. From that point on, his life lacked direction or purpose. The situation worsened in 1999 when, at 19, Xiao Chao was caught stealing money from home. His furious father beat him severely and banished him back to mainland China. It wasn't until a year later, when his eldest brother was getting married, that his mother's repeated pleas finally convinced Zhiqiang to allow Xiao Chao to return to Hong Kong. Upon his return, his father, determined to prevent his son from becoming a burden, gave him two choices: return to school or find a job. Without hesitation, Xiao Chao chose employment. However, his father imposed one condition. Xiao Chao had to contribute 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, approximately $500 monthly to the household expenses. With his withdrawn personality and poor communication skills, Xiao Chao couldn't hold down any job for long. Each time he lost a job, his father grew more disappointed, increasingly viewing his youngest son as a hopeless failure. Faced with his father's anger and harsh criticism, Xiao Chao maintained his characteristic silence, never fighting back, never explaining, never responding. Ironically, this silence only fueled his father's rage. The situation reached a breaking point 1 month before the murders, when Xiao Chao lost another job, one his father had secured through personal connections. This time, he was fired for fighting with a co-worker. Terrified of his family's reaction, particularly his father's, Xiao Chao kept the job loss secret. For an entire month, he maintained the pretense of going to work, leaving early and returning late, all while his internal turmoil deepened. On July 7, 2001, the day of the murders, Xiao Chao followed his usual routine of pretending to return from work. He arrived home around 6:30 p.m. Already in a poor mood and characteristically silent, he entered the house without a word. This behavior triggered his father Zhiqiang's anger. "You ungrateful child!" Zhiqiang shouted. "Coming home this late and not even greeting your father." When Xiao Chao remained silent and walked past him, Zhiqiang escalated. "What's the point of having you? You're worthless. You might as well jump off a building." He punctuated this statement by punching Xiao Chao in the face. Seeing this, his mother tried to intervene. "Stop hitting and scolding the child." This only redirected Zhiqiang's anger. "You're the one most responsible for how he turned out. A soft mother raises a useless child." For Xiao Chao, this was all too familiar. He maintained his silence, fearing that talking back would only make things worse. He quietly went to take a shower. However, when the three sat down for dinner, Zhiqiang was clearly still angry and brought up the unemployment issue. In fact, Zhiqiang had known about Xiao Chao's job loss from day one, but hadn't confronted him directly, waiting for his son to confess. However, given Xiao Chao's uncommunicative nature, this only made his father increasingly angry. At the dinner table, Zhiqiang finally exploded. "You can't even find a job yourself, and when one is handed to you, you mess it up. Don't think I don't know you've been fired. Instead of wandering around all day, you might as well kill yourself." Facing his father's bitter accusations, Xiao Chao remained silent. Around 7:30 p.m. after dinner, his mother left for the supermarket, leaving father and son in a suffocating atmosphere. Zhiqiang, seemingly further provoked by his son's silence, continued his verbal assault. "Of all my children, you're the most useless. You might as well be dead. I wish I'd never had you." Xiao Chao sat on the sofa, eyes fixed on the TV, deliberately acting as if he couldn't hear his father's words. This apparent indifference pushed Zhiqiang over the edge. He walked over, stood blocking the TV, and demanded, "Are you really working or not? Hand over the $500 for household expenses right now. Answer me." But Xiao Chao, who had been pretending to work, couldn't produce the money. His father continued, "If you can't pay up, I'll change the locks. Don't ever think about coming back to this house. You're not welcome here anymore." These threats cut deep into old wounds, reminding Xiao Chao of the pain of being banished home a year earlier. As anger and resentment surged within him, he rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face in an attempt to calm down. When this proved futile, in a moment of complete irrationality, he stumbled into his father's room, grabbed a hammer, and walked back out. At this point, Zhiqiang was still sitting on the sofa watching TV, completely unaware that his perpetually silent son was approaching from behind with a deadly weapon. In that fateful moment, Xiao Chao, still without uttering a word, brought the hammer down hard on his father's head. Caught completely off guard, Zhiqiang collapsed immediately. But the fury had completely consumed Xiao Chao's reason. He continued striking, blow after blow, until his father lay lifeless. Xiao Chao stood frozen before his father's body. After a while, moving like an automaton, he took scissors and began cutting pieces from nearby clothing. With trembling hands, he used these cloth pieces to wrap his father's head. In his panic, he dragged the body into the bedroom and hastily tried to clean the bloody floor. As he was still lost in this horrific reality, the sound of a key turning in the lock jolted him back to awareness. His mother, Li Ying, had returned from the supermarket. In a moment of panic, he hid in the bathroom, his heart pounding behind the closed door. Li Ying entered the quiet apartment. Finding no one in the living room, she walked toward the bedroom. The moment she opened the door, a terrified scream shattered the silence. As she turned to run, crying for help, Xiao Chao burst out of the bathroom, desperately calling for her to stop. In that moment of confrontation, Li Ying, overcome with shock, sobbed out, "Why did you do this?" Xiao Chao, his voice trembling, replied, "I didn't want this to happen." But any explanation was too late. As Li Ying continued screaming and turned to flee, Xiao Chao, terrified she would alert the police, raised the hammer once again. After the first blow, Li Ying turned to face her son, her eyes filled with both horror and heartbreak as she stared at him. That brief moment when mother and son locked eyes, her gaze pierced Xiao Chao's heart like a knife. Unable to bear that haunting look, he swung the hammer more frantically, as if trying to forever erase that gaze from his mind. In his complete panic, Xiao Chao repeated what he had done with his father, dragging his mother's body into the bedroom, placing her beside his father, and covering both with a blanket, as if trying to hide his horrific crimes. With shaking hands, he called his sister Chu Feng to ask about her plans for the night. Learning she would be out playing mahjong all night temporarily eased some of his anxiety. Next, Xiao Chao took a quick shower, watched TV for a while, then went to bed. Throughout the night, the metallic smell of blood lingered in the apartment. He turned on the fan, trying to disperse the smell. Somehow, he managed to sleep in the apartment that night, in the presence of his parents' bodies. The next morning, Xiao Chao took over 4,000 Hong Kong dollars from his parents' wallets and rushed to the Broadway cinema in Suanwan Plaza. There, he watched 2 comedy movies back to back, as if trying to escape his horrific reality. He returned home around 9 p.m. Around 10 p.m., his eldest brother Ma Xiujian called, saying he wanted to bring over some late-night snacks. Xiao Chao deflected, saying their parents were asleep, adding ominously, "They won't wake up." Although his brother sensed something strange in his tone, he never imagined the worst had happened. Shortly after, Xiao Chao learned that his sister Chu Feng was on her way home. In panic, he quickly gathered his clothes and fled into the night. In the days that followed, Xiao Chao lived like a shadow. During the day, he wandered between libraries and empty streets. At night, he slept under the eaves of the Tsuanwan waterfront park, quietly washing up in the sports field changing rooms, like a homeless person in the bustling city. This was the full account Xiao Chao gave after his arrest. Throughout the investigation, he showed complete cooperation, detailing every aspect of the tragic incident. "This isn't what I wanted," he confessed, his voice full of remorse. According to his testimony, he struck his father only because he desperately wanted a moment of peace, a brief respite from the constant criticism. He claimed he never intended to kill his father, but once he started, he lost all control over his actions. Speaking about his father, Xiao Chao tearfully admitted, "I didn't hate my father, but I always felt he hated me." Regarding his mother, the guilt seemed to tear him apart. He acknowledged that she had always been gentle and loved him unconditionally. In that fatal moment, he just wanted her to stop screaming. But after the first blow, her look of pain and disappointment sent him into such a panic that he lost all self-control. On November 21st, 2002, the case went to trial at the High Court. Though charged with 2 counts of murder, Xiao Chao only pleaded guilty to manslaughter. His defense lawyer argued that the tragedy stemmed from the conflict between an old-fashioned father's rigid views and a troubled 21-year-old son. Regarding his mother's death, the lawyer insisted it was an impulsive act with no premeditation. The defense called Dr. Leung from the Psychology Department of Chinese University of Hong Kong as an expert witness. Dr. Leung testified that Xiao Chao suffered from avoidant personality disorder. People with this condition, he explained, are particularly vulnerable to criticism and mockery. Symptoms including low self-esteem, social avoidance, and difficulty expressing emotions are characteristic of this disorder, which can lead to extreme reactions in certain situations. However, the prosecution's expert disagreed. Their witness, the head of forensic psychiatry at Castle Peak Hospital, testified that after multiple meetings with Xiao Chao, he found him mentally sound. While acknowledging that some of Xiao Chao's behaviors resembled avoidant personality disorder, the expert maintained these weren't sufficient for a diagnosis. More importantly, he noted that people with this disorder typically don't display uncontrollable violent behavior. Therefore, even if Xiao Chao had the condition, it couldn't justify the murders. Xiao Chao's older brother, Ma Xiujian, also testified. He stated that their father actually loved Xiao Chao the most, but became particularly concerned due to his son's isolated nature and poor performance in school and work. He emphasized that their father's harsh discipline was actually an expression of love and high expectations. During his own testimony, Xiao Chao emphasized that he had been pushed to his breaking point by his father's scolding and just wanted him to be quiet. When the judge asked why he didn't simply leave the house for a while and return later if he wanted peace, Xiao Chao explained that since his father said he wasn't welcome in the house, he feared he wouldn't be able to return. The judge pressed further, asking why, if he hadn't intended to kill, he didn't call for help or try to save them. And why did he cut their clothes? Faced with these questions, Xiao Chao said he had panicked and wasn't thinking clearly, adding that if he had been able to think rationally at the time, he would have called the police. After a week of trial, on November 27th, the jury reached their verdict. For his father's death, they found Xiao Chao not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter, sentencing him to 12 years in prison. This verdict considered that Ji Qiang had physically struck Xiao Chao and provoked him with insulting words before his death. However, regarding his mother's death, since she had shown no provocative behavior toward him, the court found him guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Both sentences were to be served concurrently. During sentencing, the judge told Xiao Chao, "I can confirm that everyone gets scolded by their parents at some point. I must emphasize that I see no reason that could justify such an extreme reaction." In 2004, Xiao Chao appealed his murder conviction for his mother's death. His appeal lawyer argued that his mother's screaming and the way she stared at him angrily could be considered forms of provocation. Though she may not have intended to provoke Xiao Chao, the lawyer claimed these actions were enough to make him lose emotional control. However, the appeals court swiftly rejected this argument and severely reprimanded the defense lawyer, calling these reasons groundless. The appeal failed for several key reasons. For a manslaughter verdict based on loss of control, the court needed to consider whether the perpetrator had time to calm down before acting. After killing his father, Xiao Chao had about 30 minutes before his mother returned, ample time to regain composure. Most importantly, Xiao Chao himself admitted his mother hadn't provoked him as his father had. After the tragedy, Xiao Chao's siblings said they would try to forgive their brother, but even years later, they couldn't come to terms with what he'd done. They stated they couldn't forgive him. During his imprisonment, none of his siblings ever visited him. The last time they saw each other was during the court testimony. This tragedy of the Ma family isn't just a horrific crime. It's a reflection of the fractures that can develop in modern family relationships. A child growing up in isolation, a father expressing love through harsh discipline, and a gentle mother unable to bridge the growing divide, all led to an outcome no one wanted. While Xiao Chao committed a terrible crime, he was, in some ways, also a victim of circumstances. His silence wasn't defiance, but the silent cry of a lonely soul. His father, hoping for his son's success, unknowingly backed him into a corner with excessive pressure and expectations. His mother, in her attempts to make peace, became an innocent victim of this tragedy. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case is about the significance of listening and understanding within families. Sometimes a hug, a word of encouragement, or simply patient listening could prevent such heartbreaking tragedies. Most importantly, love shouldn't just be held in the heart, but expressed in ways that the loved one can understand and feel. Today, the story of the Ma family stands as a profound warning about building family relationships. It reminds us that behind every act of violence lies untold stories of pain, and sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't death, but the lost opportunities to express love. And that's it for today's heartbreaking case. What do you think about this family tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.